Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Sword of the Spirit, Sermonator, and hope you had a good week. And we are going to resume today our continued story of the timeline going back from Jacob and Esau. And eventually, I can't say when, over the next several weeks, we're going to get the full timeline all the way out to today, where there's going to be a lot of references to what's going on today. But just to go, and let's just reiterate for a second, and where we were last week, we spoke about how the three kings related to Jezebel and affiliated with this whole process of trying to eliminate the bloodline. We have to mention that inheritance and the bloodline is a big problem here. And to continually go back so that we can just reference, we're just having these nice chats now with some teaching and some guiding here. The bloodline in the ancient Hebrew was followed through the mother. The inheritance, the estate, was passed along through the father. Someone asked me the other day why Ishmael, although the firstborn out of wedlock with Abraham's handmaid, is Sarah's handmaid Hagar, which means sojourner or traveler, and she did, because it wasn't through Sarah. Part of his inheritance was provided later on in life to Ishmael, and Ishmael himself became 12 tribes, just like Jacob did, Israel. But the bloodline goes through Sarah, and that's why Isaac was a child of promise. Okay, so just in speaking about this, Jezebel manifests herself through that country. And I almost hate to say her, because the Jezebel spirit just possessed her, and we use her as an example because she was a murderer, just like her children. And it doesn't matter what religion, there's 4,000 religions in the world today. Just, that's a mind-boggling thought. It doesn't matter what country or religion it manifests through, but it's there, all right? Its purpose is to destroy everything, all right, that has to do with the Messiah. And we see it operating in society today. It's age-old. It's the first and oldest strategy in the book. They still use it today. We see it in our government today, every day. It's divide and conquer. And once you begin with the propaganda and the lies, you begin to divide, conquer, control, isolate, and ultimately destroy. That's the plan. That's what that spirit does. And in case the spirit needs to destroy anything in its wake, that's what it's trying to do. But it's particular to the bloodline, to the Messiah. So it's amazing to me that people don't see some of this hiding in plain sight, stuffed up with religiosity and this kind of entity, Christianity, Judaism, all of these things, all right, that people get tossed around with. And we have a book here, all right, that takes us back thousands of years, recorded, all right, through the Hebrew people up to this date. And it's sitting here in plain sight. We get caught up with every wind of doctrine, as it says, all right? It's amazing to me that we don't see this. It's this spirit tried real hard then. It's still trying today. It's not given up, okay? Every time you see an attack against Israel, it's this spirit rearing up. Anything to prevent the first coming of the Messiah and the promised return of the Messiah, trying to wipe out Israel so that there's nothing to go for. It's all about Jerusalem. People think today that this is about property. Well, it's not. Israel occupies 9,000 square miles in a parcel of land that's 9 million square miles. It ain't about the land. It's about Jerusalem and everything that goes with it. And it's, as I said, hiding in plain sight. So we talked about the issue of antichrist that we hear this statement all the time. It's not some person. It means anti-Messiah, and it can mean anti, A-N-T-I, against, or A-N-T-E, in the place of, because the meanings in the Hebrew and even in some of the Greek have that double meaning. And truthfully, there is a double-edged sword here, all right? Christos, or Christ, means anointed one, and Yeshua means our salvation. So what we're talking about here is the Messiah. Very simple. Salvation of God. So anything that's anti-Messiah is also inherently anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism in the world is on the rise, and when it is, war is usually on the forefront. In the United States alone, the latest news on that regard is 388% up anti-Semitism in the United States, of all places, okay? The land of the free and the home of the brave. I hope so. So, it's pretty ties together. A lot of people don't see this. A lot of people call themselves believers in the church today, the body Messiah. But could you imagine anybody that calls himself a believer that's anti-Semitic? All right, people are going to believe what they want to believe, but it's time for that change. But anyway, getting back to that genealogy, we talked last week about the three kings that were omitted. They were Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah. They were related to Ahab, and they had to do with king of Ahab being the king of the northern kingdom, and his relationship with Jezebel, his wife. That was the real problem. So that's our quick recap. And Ahab's wife, Jezebel, promoted Baal worship, paganism, as a Jewish queen, all right? Worshipped to Baal. In fact, we know her name, Ishabel, means worshiper or woman of Baal. She persecuted and killed the prophets of Jehovah, all right? You know what? Our guy, Jehu killed him back. Because of her evil acts, Elijah actually placed a curse on the house of Ahab. As I think we mentioned at one point in time, in 2 Kings chapter 8. We'll take a very quick look at that. 2 Kings chapter 8. And we're going to look at verse 11. Second here. And we see what it says. He settled his countenance steadfastly until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. Okay? Elijah was more than upset. We see here, as we continue on, we can go from chapter 8, verse 18. I'm sorry, we're going to go up to 18 as well. And he walked in the way of his kings of Israel, and he did the house of Ahab. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And this is the reign, okay, of Jehoram, Ahab's son. We see a similar rendition in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 6. This alliance of Joram, Jehoshaphat's son, and Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab, all right, and Jezebel, right, they had children. Athaliah, and we've said this before, had a son whose name was Ahaziah. And then the next two lineages down that we read of in Matthew that we referenced last week were eliminated in that genealogy because of that relationship. And we know that Athaliah was essentially Jezebel. Jezebel was one of the great-grandmothers of the Messiah, believe it or not, because of the bloodline that she had entered into when she became the queen. All right. Illegitimate as she was, the only queen to murder and murder her own children. Okay? It's remarkable that Jezebel, who was just so wicked, a witch, killed everybody, including her whole family. All right? Yes, her children. All the children that we spoke about, a couple last week and a few here we talked about today, except one. We mentioned Joash. And I know I've said this before. We're going to go slow through it so that you understand. Joash, she tried to kill. She couldn't. The reason she couldn't, because his aunt saved him, all right, and pulled him in with the court, and the court protected him. He was 7 years old. And when Athaliah found out that her orders weren't carried out, she literally went nuts because he was promoted to king by the court. He's a little boy, he didn't know much. He didn't say anything, but he became the king. And she literally went nuts. She didn't know the kid was alive, and now he's being named king, while she's the only regnant monarch queen that ever in Israel's history, okay? Regnant means as a reigning monarch, but she had no husband. Now remember, Jezebel, one of Jezebel's names also implies without cohabitation. In other words, she's on her own. Well, it was really Athaliah, her daughter, that was without cohabitation, okay? No king. So she had complete control of everything allegedly going on in the nation, except they didn't let her kill Joash. Her aunt saved him, brought him to the rest of the court, and pronounced him king, as he should have. He reigned for 40 years. He was 7 when he was anointed as king. And she lost her mind. And we say, well, what's the real issue here? Well, the real issue is he was the last one in line for the bloodline for the Messiah to continue. So if she didn't kill him, there was still a legitimate bloodline. And who was going to continue that, if not her? She was the only daughter. Remarkable. But, as always is the case, God basically thumbed his nose at the whole Jezebel issue, at Athaliah, and saved Joash. And Joash, by the way, his name in Hebrew means, God hath made himself a man. And depending on how you say it, it means more than one thing. God hath made himself a man, okay, which is what he did with the Messiah, or God hath made himself a man to do and carry on through the bloodline. It's a double meaning, a double-edged sword, and they both mean exactly both things, the name. All right? Kind of ironic. Jehovah has become a man, pointing directly to Yeshua, the birth. Imagine the scripture is perfect when you really dig in and take a look at it. And not many do, from what we're seeing. Anyway, let's go back. We're going to go back and forth here a little bit. Things that we may have mentioned prior, and how this estate, how this whole bloodline thing is tied to this Antichrist spirit, or this anti-Messiah, anti-salvation spirit. All right, anti-God. It's important to understand this because anything that exalts itself in the place of God and the Messiah is automatically idolatrous. Idolatry. Broke the first commandment. You broke them all. And it's anti-Semitic. Completely anti-Semitic. All right? In the book of Malachi, just to show you, very end of the Old Covenant. We look at chapter 1, one of verses 2 through 5. Listen to what it says. Now, this is Malachi, right? This is the last book of the Old Covenant. It says, "Yet you say, wherein hast thou loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother, says the Lord? And yet I loved Jacob." Okay? He made it clear. He made it clear what was going on. "And I hated Esau." And hate doesn't mean you want to strangle him and kill him. Hate in Hebrew means, and even in our means, to love less than. So he loved Esau less than, if that's even possible, because of who Esau was. He wasn't a very lovable guy. All right? "I hated Esau, and I laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness." All right? In verse 4, "Whereas Edom," which is what Esau became, the nation of Edom, Edomites, says, "We are impoverished, but we will return and build desolate places. And thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw it down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. And your eyes shall see, and you shall say, the Lord will be magnified from the border of Israel." Okay? So we see this connection between Esau and Edom. They say, "We're going to do whatever, God, forget it." And he says, "You go ahead. You come back and build, and I'm going to tear it right down again." Why? idolaters. Esau was a wild animal who sold his birthright for a bowl of lentil soup. I mean, I've had some lentil soup in my day, and it's pretty good, but I'm not giving up my birthright for that. He didn't care. And, the name that we talked about, Jacob, Yaakov, means supplanter, but it also means restrainer. He tried to hold him and restrain him from destroying their father's legacy, because they both went away rich. Had they not, and had Jacob not done that, and had he not sold his birthright for a bowl of beans, he probably would have destroyed the entire administration of the estate. Plus, he was married to all kinds of Canaanite pagan women. He had no taste for the administration of the estate. He had no taste for the estate, and he had no taste for God, for Jacob's God. And remember, Jacob's name was changed later to Israel, which means he shall be the Prince of God. So you have Esau, okay, who, by the way, did anything he could to get the birthright back. He went to his uncle Ishmael and said, how can I get the birthright back now that, Isaac was done and gone, Jacob's father. And he said, well, just marry my daughter. So he was conned into marrying his own cousin after he was already had 5 wives who were all pagans, Canaanites. And you can see the path that he was on. And that effort right there alone shows us the treachery and how we are where we are today. And as we get down the line a little bit more with the study, we're going to see just precisely who Esau really became. Okay? All right, so this whole anti-Semitic thing is a big problem. It's by design. Because the whole concept of Messiah through the Jewish people, all right, and the people of Israel is the intention here. The intention of divide, conquer, isolate, destroy is to destroy everything and anything that God has deemed as good. All right, anything that has to do with God and his chosen. His Messiah is the ultimate target of destruction. It always was for these spirits, and particularly for the Jezebel spirit. And when you search the bloodlines, you're going to see that there are many stories in Scripture, as in the book of Esther, that speak to these facts. All right, Esther does the unthinkable. She presents herself to the king and saves her people Israel from Haman, who wanted to destroy the entire Jewish people. Well, when we start to take a look at Haman and we follow his bloodline, turns out that Haman wound up being hung or hanged. And we know that Haman's bloodline traces right back to Esau, just as King Herod's did. So you see a very similar pattern. There were people placed in time in the kingly courts that were there to destroy and to make sure that this bloodline was ended so that the Messiah could not be born, the promise. And Herod, King Herod, by the way, because Esau's kingdom is Edom, and among others he had, but predominantly the Edomites. And from the Edomites came who are called the Idumeans. And if you record that Herod was an Idumean, I-D-U-M-E-A-N, Idumean. All right? So when he heard about this child of promise, it was probably, the Messiah was probably in the area of a year old, over a year old, maybe more. When word got out, what happened? You know the story, that he put an edict out to kill all the little boys that were 2 years old and under. Take them out. Don't take any chances to find this particular boy, and maybe we don't. He killed them all. We didn't kill the Messiah, though. So what I'm showing you here, and I'm going to go with many more examples, but it's a pattern. It's a pattern of behavior that has continued since, Isaac with Jacob and Esau. And it's clear. In fact, it's very clear. And as we get down the pike a little bit more about where Esau settled and who Esau represents today, it's going to be a shock and an eye-opener. But it's all here, and it's all easily proven. All right? But so before we do that, we're gonna go take another little tack here. We're gonna go back yet again in time, and we talked about Ishmael, right? Abraham's first son through Hagar, and as I mentioned just a few moments ago, and from our study, there's not only 12 tribes of Israel, there's 12 tribes of Ishmael too. All right? Yes. Again, a copycat situation. And obviously the 12 real tribes of Israel come from Jacob, and Ishmael, Jacob's uncle, had 12 tribes as well. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting how the counterfeits always appear? And we begin to see a pattern here. We're familiar with the story of Abraham and his son. We've talked about Hagar and Ishmael, the firstborn rights. We just talked about it a minute ago. So we read here in Genesis chapter 17, verse 20. Go all the way back to Genesis. Genesis 17, 20. And I'll be there in just a second. Pages are so delicate sometimes. Genesis 17, verse 20 says, "And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee." His name Ishmael means God has heard. "I have blessed Ishmael, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant," in verse 21, "will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year." And he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. So that was a conversation that he had with Abraham, promising him his own son, Isaac, the son of laughter. Isaac means laughter, because his mom giggled and laughed at 90 years old, saying, "Yeah, I'm going to have a child." "Sure, I am." Well, with God, all things are possible. But as for Ishmael, okay, as for Ishmael, it says, "God has heard, I have heard thee." That's what Ishmael means. And he blessed him, and he said he's going to be fruitful and multiply and become a great nation. So it's not like little Ishmael was sent away with nothing. We had more than enough and the promise. But we don't hear these things. "And the 12 princes, I will make them a great nation." It's important to understand, again, that there are always areas of perceived counterfeit, and that there are 12 tribes of Ishmael. God said he's going to bless them in a certain way. But there are 12 tribes of Jacob, and God said those are his chosen, and they're going to be blessed in a certain way. But it didn't always work the way God intended because of man's choices. Man has a free will choice. And everything can be laid out right in front of you. I mean, we do it ourselves every day. How many times do we pass up an opportunity to pass up an opportunity? I know I do, and we don't see clearly for what's right in front of our face. There's got to be more. There's got to be something. We have to deflect. We have to go a different direction. We have to do it our way, all right? And it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Man's choices are often faulty because they're made outside the will of God without asking. So, to give you a little bit more about our buddy Ishmael and his reach, all right, in Genesis chapter 25, let's go right there. Genesis chapter 25, verses 12 through 16. Listen to here, okay? "Now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham." And isn't it interesting that Hagar was an Egyptian, and how the Hebrews went into Egypt in captivity and were tried to be destroyed as well? Let's not forget. Again, the pattern repeats itself all through Scripture. "And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael is Nebahoth, Kedar, Abdil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tamar, Jephthah, Naphish, Kadesh. And these are the names of Ishmael, and they're the names by their towns and their castles. 12 princes according to their nations. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And then he gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people. And they dwelled from Havilah unto Shur, Egypt, to Assyria. And he died in the presence of his brethren. So he was a great nation already, even then. And these are things that we don't see, and this is why we don't know what the patterns are, and we can't follow the history of what happened in the destruction and the process of trying to do as God said, and to begin to see what happened in the pattern of the 12 tribes of Jacob and the 12 tribes of Ishmael. Eventually, it would come down, and it is going to come down to that battle. Yes, Jacob and Esau's battle. That will kick off our end here. All right. These encampments at towns of the 12 princes, the nations, essentially they were located in southern Jordan in the desert of Saudi Arabia, okay, in the neck of the woods. And there were tribes that moved around. They're all Bedouins, and wanderers. And as I said before, there's no borders in the Middle East. Even today, the map makers, they don't pay attention to that. These were nomadic wanderers, these tribes and these clans, okay? They just really extended and expanded out, and that's what they did. And we don't know a whole lot about them, but we do have some records, and some of the important ones is Nebajoth, Ishmael's eldest son. He's mentioned by the historian Josephus, Jewish historian who was a general in the army, who recorded many things, including the death and the acknowledgement that there was a Jesus of Nazareth who was killed on a cross. So when people say there's no historical record, yes, there is. Go read his Josephus Antiquities, and you'll see. We've talked about this before. These folks were sheep herders, goats, cattle. Like it says in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 7. Let's go there real quickly. Isaiah chapter 60, right near the end of the book. Isaiah has 66 chapters, just like the Bible has 66 books. So chapter 60, verse 7 says, all the blocks of Kedar shall be gathered together unto thee, and the rams of Naboth shall minister unto thee. They shall come up with the acceptance of my altar, and I will glorify the house of my glory. So you see, there, when he mentions the herds and the cattle and everything, that's wealth that they're talking about. And Ishmael is also mentioned quite often in the record of the Assyrians, all right, in the Nabatean or the Nabatean area of the Middle East. Those are the Arabian nations, and that is the Jewish antiquities that Josephus, the historian, speaks of. And Josephus, item I-22-1, if you have the book, okay, which he wrote during the time of the Nabateans and was supposedly in existence, and he had this information directly from them. So he got this. It's not like he wasn't inventing this stuff. And these were Assyrians. Essentially, they were Arabians, okay, Arabs. And in 703 BC, they and the Chaldeans had a little war against King Sennacherib and the Assyrian rulers. And these people, the ancient records of Tilgath-Pileser III, he's mentioned in the Bible more than once, was one of the rebels and a descendant of Hagar, Ishmael's mother. So we see how these tribes move and how they grow and how they assimilate and how they go to war, okay? The Assyrian kingdom eventually broke into the two as two brothers began to rule, one in Babylonia and one in Assyria. And there were both two kingdoms that were conquered Israel. So they're noteworthy to mention, as well as it's pretty clear from the records in 586 BC that there began a gradual migration north into the Jewish lands that were emptied or vacated by Nebuchadnezzar and the tribes of Arabia at that time. They all began to move northward toward the city that we now call Aqaba, a very short move inland for the Nabatean or the Nabateans to occupy that land. And it became Edom. That land became Edom, okay? And that's what we're going to finish up with tonight. So, until next week, and we'll continue along our study, may he who makes peace in high places make peace for you. It's going to get even more exciting as we go. God bless, and I'll see you next week, okay?